Well, we're in the last stretch, but I actually think this is going to be an incredibly interesting day. All we're going to do is try and solve the climate crisis in a day. So we believe in big, outrageous goals. And I want to start off with just a couple of videos to ground things, and then we'll move in. So let's see if I've gotten any better at using the technology today than yesterday.
As construction projects continue to experience cost and schedule overruns, how will capital projects be planned and executed in the future? Advanced work packaging is a proven methodology to create safer, more predictable, higher quality projects with compressed schedules and lower total installed costs. At Group ASI, we believe that AWP is at the core of a much needed transformation in the capital projects industry. AWP will be the foundation of such a future, enabling highly efficient and effective execution planning. For the past 20 years, Group ASI has been supporting construction productivity, working globally with the Construction Industry Institute, the Construction Owners Association of Alberta, and more recently, the European Construction Institute, to help companies implement project performance initiatives. Our public and private events focus on construction productivity and provide thought leadership forums for project owners, contractors, vendors, and academia to more effective and efficient projects. Through strategic partnerships, we are helping to create communities of practice to share knowledge, encourage discussion, and promote adoption of advanced work packaging and related processes and technologies. We continue to work with CII, COAA, and other industry associations to help define the future of construction. Group ASI provides you with opportunities to access innovative solutions to project delivery challenges and engage with leaders in the construction industry. Contact us for more information about construction productivity events and to discover new channels for networking and resources that will improve your project's key performance indicators.
So I wanted to start with something a little bit positive, because you're going to see our safety moment video, and when you do, it's going to be a little sobering. It's on the climate change issue and just how serious this is. So just setting you up for the fact that we'll be talking about that shortly, and it is daunting. So comments from the organizer. Just before this conference, we actually held a capital projects leadership forum. And in it, we said there's some building blocks that we have to look at. If the challenge is to address the climate crisis, how do we do that? And so the first building block was we need to be more productive in our projects. And that's where advanced work packaging comes in. And then we said, well, okay, we need to be more productive in our projects. How do we do that? One of the ways we do that, in addition to AWP, is leveraging technology. And there's lots of technology that exists right now. There's lots of initiatives, but how do we get those to align together so we can use them to address the challenge that's facing us? And then the final area that we identified was there's going to be a workforce capacity issue. We have a lot of projects that are going to be coming down the pipe at us because of the climate challenge. And I won't talk about how much. Jeff's going to be mentioning that, but it's daunting. And the thing is, it's not that we're going to take projects we're already completely familiar with and just do more of them. We're going to be doing a lot of smaller projects, a lot of bigger projects, a lot of different projects that we may not have a lot of experience with. And in order to do that, we have to increase our workforce capacity. Some of that's training, some of that's adding new people, but then you've got to look at, well, is the culture that we currently have in place going to support a change to the workforce? So those are all topics that we're going to be talking about today. I said this was maybe a little sobering. Enjoy.
Right now, we're facing a man-made disaster of global scale. Our greatest threat in thousands of years, climate change. If we don't take action, the collapse of our civilizations and the extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon. The world's people have spoken. Their message is clear. Time is running out.
The amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere now is 50% higher than it was in 1900. And not only are we piling in more and more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but we are chopping down the forests of the earth at a great rate. And the forests themselves are the most efficient consumers of carbon dioxide that there are on Earth. We're going to destroy the ground because the soil of a rainforest isn't very good. We are actually tampering with the climate of the Earth and with the very atmosphere that we breathe. When we talk about the disappearance of the ozone layer, we don't know what will happen when the ozone layer goes. The world has become so fragile that we cannot subject the Earth to the tortures we can now inflict upon it. When we talk about the greenhouse effect, we're talking about something that affects the entire Earth. And these problems are life and death problems. They go to the root of the viability of the planet itself. If there's one thing that is biologically certain about the human species is that it is a human species, one species.
If we don't stop the destruction of our natural world, nothing else will matter. Simply put, if we don't protect nature, we can't protect ourselves.
The only way we can solve a problem is by a human solution. Never can we sit back and wait for miracles to save us. Miracles don't happen. Sweat happens. Efforts happens. Thought happens.
So when we showed the video yesterday, the Kinsey video, and it said that Europe's got more programmers, Europe's prepared for this, Europe knows what needs to be done. I think all of that is true. It doesn't diminish the challenge facing us. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. Our keynotes are going to be outlining what's facing us, and then in our two plenary sessions, we'll be talking about how we can address the climate change issue. So again, I want to thank our sponsors sponsors and patrons because they made this possible. And we've got a couple of questions for you. Just like yesterday, Steve's going to take over. So if you can either log in or take the QR code. Okay. I correct myself. 3 questions. Where are you from? And then the other 2 relate to climate change. And this time we do have it as a word cloud. Yeah, or we can just ask. So, no great surprise, like yesterday, most of the people are from the UK, but we have a distinctly European and international feel to the group. Steve, can I get you to take us to the next question? So, where would you say your organization is in terms of achieving environmental efficiency? And the range is anywhere from haven't started to ahead of the game. Okay. I would guess that if we did this in North America, there would be a bit bigger spike on the haven't started, but our biggest response so far is we've started. We're getting there. Haven't started, and then ahead of the game, only 11%. So that's your organization. Steve, can you take us to the last question? So we're going to be talking about the Net Zero 2050 Challenge. Do you have a complete understanding of what that is? Do you not know at all, or are you someplace in the middle? And basically about 3/4 of you either have a medium or a high understanding, but 80%, changed again. So, you know, someplace around 20 to 25% of you are saying you have very little understanding of this. The rest have some level of understanding. You will all, I promise you, have a better level of understanding of this when you leave today. Okay, Steve, can you return me to the presentation? Thank you. It's interesting how technology has become such a big part of our lives. So we didn't show you this slide yesterday, but there is a virtual component to the conference, and there's also a physical component to the conference. All of the sessions that we've been provided with are available on the virtual site, and anything that we've recorded in this room is available on the virtual site. So even for you who are here physically, be aware you can go back and take a look at presentations again, or you can see presentations you weren't able to see the first time. And that's through our Eventry site and through the through the FeedLoop site. So if you have any questions about that, Steve is here. He'll be able to help you with that. Okay, our kickoff presenters today are John and Jay, who you are familiar with. I'm going to let Jay start us off. So,
how long do I have, Lloyd?
Oh, days.
Okay, are you sure? Here's your phone.
Thank you.
Good morning. Everybody got in early last night and primed for today, right? Nobody overdid it? No? Good. So maybe just to kind of go back to yesterday a little bit and recap. Let's talk about keywords. What were the keywords yesterday that you heard most throughout the day? What were one of them? Productivity. Good. What other? Waste. What about technology? I think every other word would seem to be technology. Lloyd said it 6 times this morning already. Collaboration, right? One more big one I'm looking for. People, yeah, people are, that's one. And digital, that's the one I was trying to get you to say, digital, right? So all these things, those are some pretty key words, and I think we all heard throughout the day how important those are. All right, I can go through that. Okay, so what I thought I would do, I know I'm just supposed to be kicking off and kind of turn it over to the next person, but it's a shame, we don't get together that often, and I feel like you're not getting your money's worth if you don't at least share with you some stuff, right? So you heard a lot of journeys yesterday around our AWP journeys, whether that was from an EPC or an owner, what the struggles are, how to implement it. Some of the questions were great. What was your biggest blocker? Was it easy? What was your, those kinds of things were really, really good discussions. So I'll just go back and say, when we talk about technology and digital, we have to always take it from a view of what we're trying to achieve. And what I mean by that is, ultimately what we want to have is better productivity, right? So our outcome should be productivity, underlined with benefits, right? Safety, quality, cost, AWP, right? So AWP is one element within the journey or the outcome that we're trying to achieve. And we went through this yesterday. I think Josh's presentation and his breakout, and I can't wait to see all of them, but there were good breakouts, right? We started with, people. People used to process technology, and that is up in the right-hand corner of that screen. Paper, right? At best, we had Excel sheets, okay? Nothing wrong with that, but that in history, that's what it started up here. Okay, so our journey basically started implementing the AWP, 4D, 5D, digital solutions. And like most people, and I would use the example of a cell phone, for instance. You always want to have the latest, don't you? I mean, our human nature is, I want the most digital thing I can get. I've got an iPhone 13. My son's got an iPhone 8. When I really go back and look at what the difference is, it's only the camera. It's the same operating system, but it's the camera. So we always want that. So when we started this journey in digital, we kind of went through that, I think, as a company. And that is looking at the tool, saying, I want this tool because it's neat. Well, we shouldn't implement things because they're neat. We implement them because they need to give us a benefit, or they need to meet our outcome, right? Help us meet our outcome. So we went on that journey, and in 2019, okay, that was kind of an inflection point for me, at least anyway, where all these things that we had available to us couldn't seem to communicate, and it was data. We needed to fix data, right? So we went on this journey over the last 3 years. CII has supported it and sponsored it, and I think we've got a really good start to common data standards. All right. I want to show you over here on the right, though, how we in Shell at least kind of viewed and handled the digital solutions and getting them actually implemented. So we all, again, when we have a conversation with a project team, we don't have the conversation of, here's a list of smorgasbord tools that you can use, pick which one you want, and we'll tell you how much it costs to implement, and we'll tell you maybe what it's going to do for you. It shouldn't necessarily be that discussion. It ought to be, on this right side of the screen, you can't see it very well, but this top row is outcomes. So these are the things like reducing HSE, schedule and cost reduction, improve productivity, best-in-class commissioning a startup, things like that, right? These are things that we want to achieve, outcomes we want. So in order to achieve those, we put together this kind of working group, all right? It's called a Construction and Commissioning Work Group, and it's just a name. But what its intent is to provide expertise in all of the functions that require support to deliver this. So we need contracts, we need HSE, we need quality, we need digital, we need systems engineering, we need IT. You know, that's the list you see to the left, right? You need all of these people or these groups, organizations, I call their functions within Shell that support projects, because my role and a lot of these functions role is to help all lines of business deliver better projects. So we support all of them. So we wanted to give them knowledge about the best practice. All right, so what we do, we say, okay, this group gets together and we take a look at the processes. AWP is a process, okay? DFMA, things like that. We have we call it factory model within Shell, but production management in the industry maybe. And I think CII is helping look at that with us. So we take all these things, these processes, and we say, all right, what are the capabilities and the technologies that support that process? Okay, and we're using them, different ones across different projects. There's no, single technology solution that we have that's going to solve everything. So there's many. So this group keeps an eye on our project uptake of these capabilities and technologies, and if the project delivers and it's the tool or the technology is good, then we might globalize that. So we want to share, we want to say, okay, project in the next project, we want you to use that technology. And that's where we got to put the documents together, make it into our contracts, put it into our standards or inside of the company, right? But as you'll see linked up through there, that data at the bottom, none of this is going to work if we don't have that data link to share across all these things. So it's been a journey. We have a project in the States, in Pennsylvania, that is finishing up. It's been 4 plus years in construction. We went in 2019. This was kind of the concept that we took into that project to say, you tell us, because they are the most digital project that we had at the time. And they still are amongst the top, right? Very, very digital. A lot of it on their own. It didn't come from the center or anything like that. They just implemented good digital solutions. And some of them, unfortunately, were reactions to problems and not done ahead of time. But again, that's why we want to do it. Let's capture that and let's bring it back. So, go to the next slide here. So how does that help you? So now what we've done is we've put together some digital recommended practices. And there's some for the front end of the project and there's some for the back end. And these are the ones I want to just go over, the execution side. And I'm not going to go through each and every one of these, but I think the point is, you asked a lot of questions yesterday about how do we implement this? How do we implement AWP? I think you also need to take a step back and say, why do you want to do something first? And it's much bigger when you talk about the technology you might need to deliver a project versus just to deliver AWP. Okay? So it's not AWP is in it, right? It's a big driver, there's no question, but it's not the end game. So we have these owners tools that we use. I went over some of those yesterday. The other thing I guess is important with this is, when you say construction, everybody thinks, well, that's just a construction thing, right? AWP is a construction thing. That couldn't be more from the truth, right? I think you that have been involved in the process understand that, but those who haven't don't. I say we're the tail wagging the dog, right? We have an opportunity to make things better and execute, no question. But the real benefit comes in the front. Because if you don't start this stuff that I'm talking about early in the project, before EPCs ever get involved, if we don't start this, we don't have that conversation about how we're going to do AWP and how we're going, tools we might use. Do we need AWP coding with our project? You know, that kind of, if that's not done in the beginning, by the time you get to execute, it's too late. And it was a great question somebody asked yesterday. Why don't construction contractors want to use AWP? Not EPCs, but constructors. It's because they don't get any. If you don't hand them something that they can work with, that helps us, then I can understand when to use it. So, enough on that. You're going to hear a lot today, again, about climate change, but keep in mind, you know, what we're trying to achieve and how that supports the climate change, okay? It's not all about climate change. And I appreciate it, everybody's work that they've done, and look forward to today. Boyd.
Great. Thank you. So, as we did yesterday, I just want to thank the industry associations that are here and helping with the session. And John's going to be our day chair today. And so I think he's got a lot to do. So I'm just going to thank our conference advisory board and pass John over as the day chair to give his comments.
Thanks, Lloyd. You don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from the keynotes. So just a quickie. We're starting at 9:30 now with Jeff Smettles and Jamie Johnson with the keynote on the race for zero. We'll have a break at 10:30 and I'll tell you a bit more about today's program. So over to you, Jeff.
Okay. I'm just moving it to your slide. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, good morning, everyone. Everyone hear me okay? Just checking, you're all alive and still okay after last night. Good, okay. My name is Jeff Smettles, and I'm here today to talk to you about AWP and project delivery in the race for zero. Now, a number of you may know what the race for zero is, but for those of you who don't, the race for zero is a UN initiative with both governments and private industry to promote the achievement of net zero emissions by 2050. Why that target? Because we're trying to restrict global temperature rises to no more than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, which we feel will mean we can avoid the very worst aspects of climate change. So that's what we're talking about with Race for Zero. Now, before I continue on about myself, I'd like to introduce my co-presenter, the brilliant Jamie Johnston from Bryden Wood. Jamie, do you want to just say a couple of words about yourself?
Hi there, morning all. My name is Jamie Johnston. As you can see, I'm a board director at Bryden Wood, which is an integrated design company, and we've spent 26 years now developing advanced forms of construction and digital tools for clients in the public and private sector, but I'll talk more about that later.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jamie. Okay, so who am I? Well, currently I work with a number of technology companies and very prominently with Asset 55 as a senior advisor. But I spent the bulk of my career, much longer than 30 years, working for Shell in the fields of mainly maintenance and projects. I've done everything from large turnarounds in refineries here in the UK, all the way to large international projects around the globe, mainly in Europe, but also in Asia. And I spent probably the last 20 years of my career with Shell working overseas. And towards the end of that period, I took on a number of global roles with Shell. So it started off where I played a senior role in Shell's Project Academy. And then ultimately, I ended up as the global discipline head for project engineering for Shell. And in between all of that, I also took on a role as the general manager for something called Efficient Execution, which was Shell's global program to say, how do we improve the efficiency of how we deliver our projects? And of course, a big part of that was looking at construction productivity. How do we improve construction productivity? So you could say that there's a common thread running through my entire career, which is looking at construction, looking at productivity, how do we improve efficiency? So if I was to claim to have any kind of subject matter expert status, as Lloyd keeps telling me that I'm a subject matter expert, it would be in that field. What I'm definitely not is a subject matter expert in climate change. I'm more what you call a concerned citizen when it comes to that aspect. So I was very grateful when, back in February this year, I was asked to deliver this keynote, that at the same time, an email dropped into my inbox from the renowned consultancy McKinsey & Company with a series of articles addressing exactly this issue. And I'll be drawing on what McKinsey had uncovered in those articles during my presentation, and particularly with the first couple of slides as we talk through it. So what does McKinsey say about net zero by 2050? Well, they said in order to achieve net zero by 2050, 3 global systems have to come together and succeed. So what's the first of those global systems? Well, it's the political system. It's the one you've all heard about. It's what's on your television screens, it's what you read in your newspapers, it's there in the social media. And this is what gets 99% of the focus. Only last year in November, there was an international get-together of all sorts of political leaders in Glasgow in the UK. It was called COP26, where they got together to discuss climate change and what was going to be the political reaction to that and to try and get commitments for people to take this forward. So what was the outcome of that? Where did that end up? What's the position by the end of COP26? Well, if you look up on the UN website now, it will tell you that basically 130 countries around the globe have now committed themselves to the target of achieving net zero by 2050. That includes here in the UK. In fact, in the UK, it's actually been written into law. Now, there's more than 130 countries in this world. And there's at least 2 really big ones I can think about that aren't fully aligned to this target of net zero by 2050. But what encourages me greatly, unlike it was a decade ago, the discussion is not about if we need to achieve net zero. The discussion has now moved to when do we need to achieve net zero. So I believe that the political system is aligning on this, and we're starting to see that momentum build. So assuming that the politics is there, what's the next system that needs to deliver? Well, it's the money. Where's all the money going to come from to pay for all of this? And this doesn't get anywhere near as much publicity. I followed COP26 reasonably carefully, and I didn't hear anything about this. So again, grateful to McKinsey, who pointed me in the right direction to another UN initiative known as GFANZ, or the Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero. And that initiative, which was sponsored by the UK and Italy, by the way, set out to contact most of the large financial institutions around the globe that provide the capital into private projects, to convince them to commit to greening their portfolio towards the achievement of net zero by 2050. Before COP26, the commitments they had on the table was about $5 trillion. Post COP26, there is now $130 trillion committed by these financial institutions to deliver the climate change transition necessary by 2050. That's a huge amount of money. And it's just as well because if you look at what GFANZ say, they think that over 70% of the capital that's going to be required is going to need to come from private industry and not from governments. So, if the political system is there, if the finance is there, what's left? It's us. It's everyone sat here in this room. All eyes are going to turn from the politicians, from the financiers, and they're going to be looking at you and your organizations and say, you now need to deliver net zero by 2050 by delivering the capital projects necessary to achieve that. Everyone feeling comfortable about that? Everyone understand what that's going to mean to you individually and to your organizations? What did McKinsey have to say? Well, they estimated how much money needs to be spent in order to achieve this. And the answer was $9.2 trillion every year between 2022, right now, and it's April, by the way, all the way through to 2050. Can you imagine that amount of money? Just to put it in perspective, it's 40% higher than the current levels of expenditure in 2021. 40% higher. And we're not talking about a peak and a trough here. We're talking about consistently every single year for nearly 30 years. It is enormous. Now that's going to put the project delivery system, and you and I, under extreme pressure. And there's going to be many issues that start to come out when we try to deliver this amount of capital over that period of time. So what are the challenges to the project delivery system? Well, fortunately, my friends at McKinsey came up with 5, and I agree with their view on this. Number 1, speed. 30 years is not a long time to deliver this amount of capital, not with the kind of lead times in our industry. We are going to need to totally reimagine the way that we deliver projects. For sure, in the front end, we need faster decision-making processes. We can't afford the lengthy front ends that we often see. But we're going to have to deliver the engineering more efficiently, procurement more efficiently, and especially we're going to need to improve productivity in construction. We've talked about it for many years. Well, this has really got to happen now if we're going to meet these kind of targets. Predictability, next challenge. Not something that we are particularly great at, particularly when we talk about the larger projects. Someone said yesterday, you know, if you set a target for a mega project to come in on time and on budget and nothing more, then it's done pretty well. And that's not a bad assessment. Well, things need to change on predictability. Technology. I don't know if people saw this, around about the time of COP26, John Kerry, who is the US climate envoy, made a speech, and he said that 50% of the carbon reductions necessary to achieve net zero are going to come from technologies that have not yet been invented. So what does that mean for us? It means that we're going to be executing projects with brand new fundamental technology. And anyone who's either done that or seen the benchmarking numbers around it will know that as soon as you introduce fundamental new technology, predictability comes under a lot more stress. Capacity. Now, we talk about supply chains, and we all know what's happened to them since COVID-19, a lot of difficulty around the globe. So there's can we get things manufactured and fabricated, and where do we get the raw materials? And that's challenge enough. But what really worries me is human capacity. Where are all these workers going to come from? We're already struggling to fill positions in many parts of the world. Where are all these workers going to come from? Where are the skills and the experience going to come from to manage all of these projects and deliver them? When the demographics in our industry have been running against us for decades, where are all these people going to come from? Safety and environment. Safety is a hard-won target in our projects, and I think we can be rightly proud of where we've taken our industry with this. But when we start pressing the button on speed, then that's going to come under challenge again, and we need to maintain our standards. And then lastly, environment. And I was shocked when I read the statement by McKinsey, which I put up on here, which says, directly or indirectly, the construction industry generates 25% of global emissions. 25%. So that means not only do we have to meet all of these challenges, but we also have to do it with a much reduced carbon footprint, otherwise we become just part of the problem. Enough challenges for everyone? All feeling good now? So what are the opportunities? What can we do about this? Well, it's going to take a lot of things to come together, and there's more time than I've got right now to talk to you about all the things that need to come together. But let's focus on AWP, because that's what we're here for today, to talk about that. And let me start by talking about the process. I think anyone who's attended this conference and was here yesterday and listened to this, or anyone's had anything to do with AWP, should take at least one thing away, and that's that it is a fundamental tool for improving productivity and eliminating waste. And if you accept that, then immediately you're speaking to those challenges of speed, predictability, and the environment. So straight away there's a connect there by applying AWP, and I know many people in this room are doing that, or at least on that journey. But as we said yesterday, what's the history here? How did AWP come about? Well, it started actually with very much a construction focus, workplace planning. And that got us so far. But we realized that we could only get so far with that because we needed to go back in the project into the engineering, into procurement, because unless we align engineering and procurement with construction, we could only get so much improvement. And even today, many engineering houses I know are still interested in optimizing engineering for engineering and not for construction, and that needs to be addressed. But then we realized we had to go further back in the project, into the front end. Why? Because in the front end, that's where all the key decisions get taken. It's where all the strategies are set. It's where all the plans get put into place. And unless we bring that construction focus all the way back into the front end, then we don't stand a chance to set ourselves up to really deeply implement AWP. So that needs to be addressed, and we need to get far more involved in the front end, and particularly the supply chain involved in the front end. But I would take this further. I believe in order to meet the challenge of net zero, we need to apply this much more broadly across the industry. We certainly need to apply it in more depth, as I've been talking. But we also need to set significantly higher targets for ourselves. We need to have a bigger ambition than we have today. And I'll point out one area which I think, we've just started to look at in AWP, but we really need to get into. And that is the subject here, to be outcome focused. The outcome of a project is not construction. Sorry about that if you think it is, but it's not. The outcome of a project is to deliver benefits. And the gap between benefits, which in my industry is starting a unit up and starting to produce on-spec product, the gap between that and bulk construction is where it goes so wrong on many of our projects. It's that completion process. And from my experience, and much of the research done by Asset 55, we find that the last 25% of your construction S-curve takes 50% of the schedule. Everyone recognize that number? Go look at your projects. So what's that telling you? Straight away, it's saying there's 25% of your schedule up for grabs there. Why aren't we going after it? Why isn't AWP helping us to tackle that challenge going forward? And I go further than that. What happens to your labor rundown curves? Those works of fiction we put together in our projects, and we show it nicely running down as we go through construction at the end? Well, I'll tell you what happens. In that complexity, in that last 25%, when we're trying to cope with bringing all of the, go into systems, bring all of the different organizations, disciplines, scopes together, and deliver it in the way that operators can actually deal with commissioning and startup, in that confusion and complexity, we lose productivity. So what do? We retain the labor and we push it into the project in the hope that we can keep up some kind of progress. What happens in reality? They work out a sequence. The work isn't planned. Your productivity gets even worse. And worse than that, you actually start to have safety incidents. In my experience, the most safety incidents on a construction project start right at the beginning when you're mobilizing and right at the end when you go through that transition into operations. That's where it happens. We need to bring focus into this area, be outcome focused and tackle that last 25%. Another opportunity I see is collaboration and repeat. Now, with this wall of capital that's coming towards us, it's going to change the commercial environment. Demand is going to start to outstrip supply. And what happens when that happens? Well, I can tell you from my experience, the last time I was involved in something that was anywhere near approaching the challenge we're going to see, I was delivering projects out in Asia, 2005 to 2010, that period. And there was another wave of capital came through our industry around the globe. And what happened was, those projects that recognized that they needed to collaborate, they needed to collapse their teams down and work as one team, where they needed to bring the supply chain on board and work with them, not against them, those are the projects that succeeded. They delivered. Those projects that didn't collaborate failed. And most of the time, they failed spectacularly. So we need to set ourselves up. This is the environment you're going to be working in. You need to be ready for that. How are you going to operate in a collaborative way to cope with the commercial environment that's going to face you? And there are opportunities if you're ready for it. Firstly, we all complain that we want to be further in the front end of a project and bring the supply chain with us. Well, that's much easier when you're working in a collaborative relationship with your contractor and you know that they're going to see the project through, so they're committed to it in the front end. It means you can adopt collaborative forms of contracting, where you can align the objectives to the project to the incentives to the contractor. And very important for me from AWP, it means that you can actually foster transparency. Transparency of data, transparency of performance, transparency of progress. And having that between the supply chain and the owner and the technology provider is incredibly important if we want to deliver AWP. And then there's repeat. What do I mean by repeat? Well, commonly, certainly in my background in oil and gas, we talk about replication. And by that, we usually mean replication of scope. You know, design one, build many, that kind of thing. And lots of projects do it very successfully. But in the more complex projects and process industry, it's a lot harder to do than it is to say, and there's lots of issues that come out of that. Now, in a moment, Jamie's going to talk about what he's doing with Bride and Wood, and they've really kind of flipped this concept on its head. Instead of replicating the full scope, the concept, he's talking about replicating at the component level. And that's done unbelievable things in the industries that Jamie works in. And if you think my 25% schedule is a scary number, you want to hear what he's achieving. It's amazing. But I think there's something, particularly in the process industries, we can do right now. We can do repeat. And what do I mean by repeat? Repeat three things. Organizations, process, including AWP, and people. And people is the one that I would really emphasize on that. Because what happens on your projects right now? You bring together a disparate group of people and organizations. They go once through the project, making mistakes all the way through. They're getting pretty good at the end of it. They're starting to show each other, and then you atomize all of that, and they never meet each other again for the rest of their lives. If we want continuous improvement, if we want to develop relationships in work, we need to repeat across projects. And we're going to have a funnel of projects coming towards us consistently over nearly 30 years. Not necessarily exactly the same scope, but it's going to be similar. Yeah, it's the same ballpark. And we know from experience, I've had the opportunity to do it in projects. We've seen it in the oil and gas industry in places like the Gulf of Mexico and the North Sea in the UK here, where that repeat has gone on and people work together, it gets better and better. You need to grab that opportunity going forward. Oh, and by the way, if you give the supply chain some actual longer-term vision rather than where's the next job coming from, they might actually start to invest in technology and in the skills of the people attacking those particular problems we just talked about. Lastly, let me talk about embracing Agile Technology, something that's close to my heart. When I was the general manager of efficient execution in Shell, I ran, and you've just seen Jay talk about it a little bit there, a program called Future of Construction. And the idea of that was to try and use technology to get better at construction, right? Roughly speaking. What we noticed very quickly is that there was a tremendous technology push. I had people inside of Shell and companies outside of Shell bringing me all sorts of technology that was going to save my day. I've got some kind of dashboard that's going to give you great oversight on the project. I've got a drone that's going to fly around your site and do magnificent things. I've got a robot. Maybe you could put a welding rod in its hand. Who knows? Jeff, it's up to you now to go make our technology successful on your project. And the frustration I had with that is when I asked simple questions, right? I said, you know, okay, that looks really good, that technology. Can you show me how that's going to move the needle on my productivity on my project? Can you show me that? Most of the time, that was, not such a great answer. So we said, well, we got two choices here. Either we can sit back and wait for the technology to come at us, as it was doing, or we can be proactive. So the decision in Shell is we said, right, let's get our SMEs together. Let's get people like Jay, who's a construction SME. Let's get people in commissioning, completions, engineering, procurement, all those people that contribute to our project, sit us down and say, what are the fundamental problems on our project that if we could eliminate them through the use of technology, would actually move the needle, eliminate waste, give us better productivity. And when we'd identified that, we'd then screen out there to see whether there's ready technologies, and if it was there, great, embrace it, use it. But if it's not, and oftentimes it wasn't, we then went and looked for the kind of technology companies that would work with us in an agile way to bring true innovation. And oftentimes, that wasn't the big boys, it wasn't the IBMs of this world and the Microsofts. They're great, they do a fantastic role, but we wanted people to work with us and collaborate and produce these things. And we ended up producing a number of really innovative solutions as a result of that. And it was proactive, and we knew by doing that it would tackle our problems. And I hope some of you will join me. I've got a breakout at 11 o'clock in the morning in this room where I'm going to talk to 3 such companies that we did business with and talked about how they are looking now to collaborate. And I'm going to be asking some owner organizations to give us their view on that and hopefully start a conversation about what can we do to be proactive in this space and embrace agile technology. But I'll leave you with 3 areas that we worked on during that stage, which I think were game-changing. And I think as we go forward, we need to invest more in. And those 3 things are, first of all, we've heard a lot about data. And Jay will tell you upside down how we need to get data standards and get our standards right so we got some consistency. He's right. But beyond that, we need to have data integrity. If you look to anyone who deals with digital and data, the first thing they say is, can you trust the information you've got out there? Is the data correct? And do we have conflicts? Does one system hold the data and another one gives you a different answer? Do we have all the attributes that we need? And there is technology out there that can help you do that and ensure it. And you need to get on board because this is foundational. If you have that, you can't move forward. Secondly, data-driven planning. We have all these fancy technologies and tools, but ultimately in our projects, it comes down to humans. People like me. I'll get Jeff in. He knows what he's talking about. He'll look at this and tell me what risks we're going to see. He'll look at this and tell me how the plan needs to go together. And unfortunately, humans are fallible. We only have a certain amount of experience, and we tend to have lots of biases, yeah? What did I see on the last project? And I'll assume it's going to be on this one. Well, the technology is out there now. With expert systems, machine learning that is delving into huge data pools and doing analysis that is well beyond the capability of any one human being. And we need to start embracing this. Let's get ourselves out of the 20th century and into the 21st and embrace this technology. And lastly, I'll talk about real-time analytics. You've heard some discussion already talking about real-time progress. And for me, real-time progress falls into 2 parts. There's the one that's getting pretty accepted now, which is the visualization part and looking at physical progress in the field using techniques like photogrammetry. And there's some great work being done there. But you also need to look at the non-physical, particularly when you're addressing that last 25% that I was talking about. So what do I mean about non-physical progress? Have you torqued the flange? Have you done the weld inspection? Have you successfully completed the pressure test? All those things are the progress that comes together in that last 25% you need to know where you are. And I'm not talking about bits of paper and people going around and recording it. I'm not even talking about tablets where people are entering their progress. I'm talking about using IoT devices in the field that as a action of work is completed will actually transmit that successful completion quality data and the status right back into the completion system and back into your planning. And that eliminates this whole paper trail nightmare that we tend to have in that last 25%. We need to embrace that. So once you know where you are physically, both in the real progress, the physical progress, and the non-physical progress, that data flow coming back all of a sudden means you can then embrace analytics. You can then run through the data on your project and you can start to look at where are the risks going to occur? Where do I take my limited team of people, because we will have limited teams, and direct them to be most effective right now based on real data? Where are the opportunities? Where, given my status, if I was to put workforce in this area, I could open up work fronts. They're going to keep my productivity high. That's going to keep that outcome focus. That's going to drive through the completion of the project. We need to embrace this technology going forward. Whether we realize it or not, I believe that the race for zero is going to be the defining issue of our time. An annual capital investment portfolio of $9.2 trillion for almost 30 years. It's the largest capital reallocation in human history. Understand that. The project delivery system, Race for Zero, is going to be very challenging. And certainly AWP can play a part, and we really need to move the needle now on our productivity and elimination of waste going forward, and more. And we need to embrace opportunities, not passively wait for them to come our way. We've talked about be outcome focused, collaborate and repeat, embrace agile technology, and more. We need to be active in this because we've got to deliver in this phase. There is no choice. Now, many of you may be saying, well, yeah, that's a nice discussion, Jeff, but, you know, I'm a bit skeptical. I'm not sure whether the politicians are going to come together and really pull this off. I'm not sure whether finance will really be there. We've been trying to improve this productivity for a while now, and I'm not sure we can raise our target levels any higher. Well, I have some optimism here when people ask me that question, and that is, of all of the challenges that I've ever come across in my career, to focus an industry, to focus the whole world, I think this is the one. Why do I believe that? Well, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what organization you work in, where you live, or even what your political affiliation is. We're all in the same boat. Jamie. Cheers. Yeah, sure. No worries, you need the...
Morning all, can you hear me? Just about. Wow, you don't want to follow Jeff talking here, that's a nightmare.
Sorry.
So you're going to see some huge overlaps, hopefully, in what I'm going to talk about and what Jeff talked about. I'd love to say that's because I'm really slick and organised and I heard Jeff's talk and thought I'd make sure I responded to it. It's not that at all, actually. I'm not that good. It's simply that I think what we're finding is loads of people obviously have had their focus sharpened by the climate crisis and by the events leading up to COP26. What we're seeing is no matter how you look at this, whatever lens you look at it through, you're starting to come up with the same drivers, the same outcomes, the same sort of approach. So I'm going to explain what UK government's been up to, which I know that sounds quite dull. It's the thing about government policy and strategies. The first half I'm going to talk about what UK government's been up to. The second half I'm going to talk about what that looks like in practice. And there are some sort of really interesting things that we're starting to see happening in certainly the private sector, and that's going to influence what's happening in the public sector. So over the last 5 years at least, our government's been on a mission to transform construction from, you know, the current state that everyone understands, low productivity, you know, high cost, all the things that Jeff talked about in terms of overruns, and try and turn it into something more like manufacturing. Not the same as manufacturing, because the drivers and the kind of the scale of things is different, but trying to get those sort of same benefits and fundamentally break the kind of time, cost, quality relationship that construction normally has. So I'm not going to talk through all of these documents, but they've been persistently publishing more and more detail around this strategy from sort of 2017, where they set out, you know, a broad direction of travel, to last year, where they've said, no, actually we understand the destination, we've got quite a detailed plan of how to get there, and they're really, really pushing this now. So I appreciate loads of people in the room work for international organisations, and, you know, why would you care what UK government's up to? This is one of these massive overlaps, I think, between what Jeff talked about and where government's head's at. The word outcomes has been used. Jay mentioned it, Jeff's mentioned it. The outcomes that we're trying to achieve are exactly the same as AWP is doing. It's exactly the same as the lean community is doing. There is a sort of fundamental understanding of where we need to get, and it's these sorts of things. So getting net zero, obviously that's driving it. On-site safety, efficiency. I mean, I won't read these out, but hopefully you can see these are exactly the same outcomes and, you know, benefits that AWP is trying to achieve, and UK governments recognise this, and it's going, that's what we need to do. We've got a plan for how to do it now. So what this means, if you are an AWP practitioner, so firstly, if you're already doing AWP, you're pre-aligned to a big chunk of work that's coming. So Jeff talked about the 9.2 trillion a year. In the UK, it's about 650 billion over 10 years, but, you know, in any market, there's tons of this stuff coming. Certainly the way the UK is thinking, if you do AWP, you're already, you know, pre-hardwired for this stuff. If you don't, what we've definitely seen in the past is that, you know, public sector does a thing, pulls a lever, and the private sector, if it works, starts saying, well, why are we not doing that? Definitely happened with building information modelling in the UK. It started out as a public sector initiative. Private sector very quickly went, well, if you're doing it for the government, you'll do it for me. And so they use it to influence the market. I'd also say there's nothing that I'm going to show or talk about in the sort of practice bit, which is like UK specific. So the solutions that we're developing in response to this, if they're any good, you know, they've got massive wide applicability. And Jeff talked about sort of collaborate and repeat. What we're trying to do is enshrine that in physical components that can be used at scale, certainly in the UK, but globally. So again, I'm not trying to show you an example of a thing and go, that's what we're doing. This is stuff that potentially anyone could pick up and learn from. And finally, there's a definite plan, I would say, to propagate this, actively propagate this anyway. So last time government mandated a big shift like this in the industry, it was BIM, Building Information Modelling. So they mandated it by 2016. There was a definite plan to propagate that outside the UK. So we deliberately open sourced our standards. We deliberately published all our standards. They have become the ISO 19650 sort of global standards. There was a definite thing of going, we'll build it in the UK, we'll make it widely available, partly to help UK industries expand, partly for the good of the planet, but there's definitely a plan to sort of propagate some of this stuff. So I'm not going to talk about all the documents. The kind of starting pistol went in 2017, where government said, we're going to use our spending power, we're going to leverage our pipeline to transform the industry. I had a conversation with Treasury 2015-16, they're going, why do we have to do this? Why does government have to do this? 9 times out of 10, we'll leave the market sorts itself out. It's fantastic, it's golden. We were saying, well, how's that worked in construction? You know, how incrementally better are we since the Egyptians from thousands of years ago? There's the old analogy, if you took an Egyptian and put him in a car manufacturing plant, his head would explode because he wouldn't understand it. If you on a building site, it'd go, hey, yeah, bit of scaffolding, there's a guy like falling over. Like, it's the same sort of approach. So we started saying that you as government are the only people that have got a big enough lever, a long enough pipeline, and a long enough interest in the assets to actually make this work. So as Jeff said, people aren't building buildings or assets because they've got time and money and it's fun. They're doing it for some other outcome, whether it's educate the nation if you're DFE, or heal the nation, or whatever it is. So I think government sort of recognised a few years ago they're the only people that can pull this lever, and then they've really sort of lent into this. So this document was published year before last. It was actually written over lockdown. So again, I thought it was quite interesting, actually. Government used the fact that everyone was sitting at home to convene a group of people you could never normally get together. So this was kind of co-written by senior civil servants, but also industry. So they invited various, the sort of general contractors, people like ourselves were invited, the big institutions. They got together this massive group and said, right, let's write what we call a playbook of 14 key policies that every department will now have to comply with. So the language they use is comply or explain. So it's basically saying you have to follow this playbook unless you've got a really good reason why you don't, but it better be a very, very good reason. So this has now become the sort of standard approach that all the departments are taking. So that in itself, I think, is a massive step forward, that there's a cross-departmental sort of clustering of policies that are bringing everyone together. And it kind of sets out, you can see the sort of key things. They use the terminology better, faster, greener, but obviously one of those key things is getting to net zero by 2050. One of the key policies, we helped write this actually, one of the key policies that underpins all of this is a principle they call harmonise, digitise, rationalise. So lots of our clients, I'm sure you're all there as well, Jeff mentioned this sort of collaborate and repeat, loads of people have all collectively worked out that the benefit of bespoke design isn't justified by the effort it takes to get there. Loads of our clients are going, actually, I don't want bespoke designs. I don't want to reinvent the wheel every time. It'd be much better if I could pick up scopes, repeat them, and get that continual improvement cycle. So that's kind of enshrined in this policy that says what we'll start to do is, instead of focusing on the difference between different sectors, we'll look for commonality. And that, again, is a complete anathema to the way we normally design things. So certainly in the UK, people are very sector-focused. So if you work in healthcare, you sort of go, stay out of healthcare, it's so hard. You don't want people coming into your sector. Same in education, same in housing. So one of the key things we said is if you ignored the boundaries between sectors and looked for commonality, I bet there's much more commonality than people think there is, and I bet you could then start to much quicker cross-fertilise learning between sectors. You could start to move entire sectors forward much more quickly than the current thing where every contractor, every client, every designer, every department is moving at its own pace. So we said if you put them all together, look for commonality, you could then start to reveal what we call platforms. We've nicked the term from automotive and IKEA, for instance. So you'd look for commonality and interoperability between components. So I was at the construction capital projects forum on Monday. In one of the groups I was in, one of the things that came out was interoperability was the biggest topic in terms of blocking some of these things. And that's partly to do with data interoperability. It's partly to do with the kind of components coming together. So that's massively recognised that we're saying what we'll do is we'll get huge data sets across government. We'll understand the commonality. We'll use that to derive a kit of parts. We'll then use those kits of parts across all sorts of sectors. And that's how you suddenly get into the numbers that manufacturing likes. That's how you get into the persistent pipeline that suppliers are desperate for. That's how you get into continual improvement and all these things. So this was a really key thing for us to get written into the policy, and I'll show you what that looks like. I'm also, like Jeff, I'm doing a breakout session later, so I'll show you how we actually did this for £50 billion pounds worth of government spend and what it kind of revealed about just quite how common all these facilities are. But it's not quite the same thing as Jeff was talking about, but it's very much aligned to that collaborate and repeat. The other big document that came out a little bit later, September last year, was the roadmap to 2030. So if the playbook is the kind of here and now, we are doing this stuff today. The roadmap to 2030 said, and by doing that stuff and continuing to improve, by 2030 we need to be here. So if we're going to hit 2050 net zero, by 2030 we need to be in a particular place. which this sets out, and we need to start now with the playbook. So again, it's sort of quite a long joined up sort of process. But again, that word outcomes, it says, look, we're not going to look at just the construction costs. We're not going to look at, you know, the individual projects. We're going to look at the outcomes we're achieving. Again, the word Jay and Jeff both used. It's in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. But again, it starts to play back more detail around this sort of platform kit of parts. So I'll show you one of these in action and kind of what it does to the construction process, and hopefully you can sort of see how you could start to apply it. But again, it's taking that principle of IKEA and saying how few components can we possibly use to build everything government builds, and how can we start to get into that kind of scale of repeatability. And you can see they've already identified you could use the same things for schools, apartments, healthcare, and offices. So the vast majority actually of the things we could buy could be built with the same kit of parts. So why do I want to do that? So for all the reasons that were talked about and Jeff's talked about, if you could do that, you'd suddenly get into that proper manufacturing mindset. So you could suddenly start to really, really get productivity and efficiency by continuing to refine those components. You could start to get that kind of stable manufacturing employment because you'd be using the same components again and again. So certainly in the UK, we tend to have a sort of boom and bust, like we'll build a load of schools and then we build none for 20 years. We build a load of hospitals and then none for 20 years. If you were using the same components, whether it's schools or hospitals or apartments, you'd build up a kind of steady state of we just need these components for whatever we're building. That would allow the supply chain then to gear up and meet you. That would allow you then to kind of get that stability. The other thing it would start to do is, so everyone understands the kind of skills gap, cost of trades and things. The example we used when we talked to the government was IKEA. So before IKEA, they weren't the first to do it, but they were certainly the biggest scale to do it. Furniture making was, like construction, very trade-based, very labour-intensive, very expensive. You couldn't do it yourself. You had to go to a specialist. Post-IKEA, the supply chain of people who can manufacture furniture is like everyone in the world virtually. So probably everyone's made some IKEA furniture. And they've done that, again, by this sort of boiling things down into a kit of parts. So he said if you had that kit of parts, you could massively simplify the construction process to the point where anyone could do it. And to demonstrate this, we actually trained a bunch of serving inmates, serving prisoners, how to build a prison, which everyone sort of laughs and goes, oh, you know, they'll build files and things into the into the cells. The principle was to show that if you could teach prisoners how to build a prison, you could use the building of the prisons program to rehabilitate a bunch of prisoners, because you could teach them all these skills. They'd be less likely to reoffend when they come out. And the outcome you achieve is lower rehabilitation. So the cycle of reoffending in the UK costs about £13 billion a year. So then you could use building of prisons, firstly to build them quicker and cheaper, but also to solve a £13 billion problem by creating a market for prisoners to come into. And that's how you really start to get some of these kind of, you know, bigger outcomes sorted. So we said, well, I'll show you what this looks like. You could literally turn construction into a really simple series of really repeatable tasks, and then anyone can build anything, which is exactly what automotive's done. It's not mechanics and engineers that build cars anymore. It's people who have been trained to assemble components in a particular sequence. So you could really plausibly massively diversify construction. Suddenly your workforce is ex-unemployed, ex-services, ex-military. We looked at the stats on Monday about the kind of the demographic. I am very representative of the demographic of construction, but we need to widen that. This is a way of doing it. And again, Jeff talked about all this technology, the idea that not only the team, when you build a building, sort of atomizes and there's no way for the learning to go anywhere, even if you had loads of, you know, IoT sensors and you were capturing all this data, doesn't necessarily help you to have loads of data about a bespoke asset. You go, well, that's useful. I was never going to build another one of those, so how is it helping? If you had these repeatable kits of parts, suddenly that data for the feedback loop becomes valuable, because you go, right, now I've learned something about the components, that will inform the next generation, the next generation. That's how you get into this continual improvement cycle. So that's the kind of theory of why everyone wanted to do this. The first project, I mean, we've been doing versions of this for certainly 15, 20 years. One of the key things about this platform's principle is we would take everything we've learnt in all of the different sectors we work in, so healthcare, airports, data centres, pharma, etc. We've developed loads of different systems for lots of different people. Part of this was we would crystallise everything we've learned over 25 years into a very repeatable kit of parts. This is the first private sector building that's actually using the kit of parts. But one of the things I think is really interesting is we initially, the first public sector person to this was the Ministry of Justice. This client, Landsec, who are the biggest commercial developer in the UK, literally used the same components that we use to build a prison and said, actually I can build an office with the same bit. So that in itself I think is quite interesting, that a thing that was funded and developed and tested for public sector was picked up by the private sector, went, yeah, got it, I'll use these, thank you. And part of the sort of improvement cycle is that the client has said anything we learn on this project, anything we learn about these components, we'll give back to the public sector. And the next place they'll get used is healthcare facilities. So I think that in itself is quite interesting. It went from prisons to offices straight into healthcare. And they're only getting better and quicker. So one way of looking at this is Lansing has spent 100 million quid on a building to teach government how to build hospitals better. You know, that's quite cool. So this building, it's just south of the river. So if anyone knows London, it's between Tate Modern and the Shard. It's just opposite St Paul's. It's a brilliant site. Super constrained, which is good. Nice testing site. It's a total kit of parts, this building, as you'll see. But architecturally, you wouldn't look at it and go, oh, it's a bit clunky, isn't it? You know, it's a very site-specific response. Architecturally, it's very, very responsive to its context. So we didn't have to compromise in any kind of architectural things to still get all the benefits of the manufacturing approach, which is, again, a thing that automotive does brilliantly. I'm sure you know when you buy a car, you get endless choice. So cars are very customizable, but the processes and the components they use to build them are identical. And so we were trying to get that and say, if we could still get you a very architecturally specific building, but still use common components and things, then we're definitely winning there. So this, we had a whole series of kits of parts that came together. The superstructure was designed as, it was literally kind of 5 or 6 components that we just used again and again. One of the things about this sort of manufacturing principle is if you're going to use a thing a bunch of times, you can spend loads of time designing it. So if I'm going to use the thing 1,000,000 times, every gram I remove, every step in the process I take out has a 1,000,000 multiplier, and that's why manufacturing's so good. It's all these like incremental gains. So we designed a sort of super, leanly designed superstructure. One of the other things is, because all of our components sit in a digital library, we don't really design the building, we configure it. So we put the components together in a particular, it's like Lego. We don't build the thing, we actually configure the bits. So I want to borrow Jeff's slide. So he said product delivery, system challenges, speed, predictability, technology, capacity, safety, and environment. So I want to remember those. So the fact we had a digital library of components meant we didn't actually design the superstructure. It was generated automatically by an algorithm. So once you've designed your library of components, they all know how they talk to each other. You don't need to design the building because the components know the maximum span, the heights, all these things. So you plug in some parameters, an algorithm generates a data set which describes the orientation and position of every component. That generates you, from that data set, we then get the bill of materials, we get the QR codes, we get the cost, we get the program, we get the logistics plan, and we also generate the BIM model from that data set. So I'm sure everyone's seen a slide where there's BIM and then, you know, people sitting around it. We have data, and BIM model is a view of it. So every time we made a change in this building, we didn't amend the BIM model, we just generated a new one because it was quicker to do that. It takes about 20 seconds to generate a completely new BIM model. So that is speed, predictability, technology right there, because you can't get it wrong. The algorithm will never design you a non-compliant thing. It'll never make a beam that doesn't work. It'll never place a component where it shouldn't be. So straight away you get absolute reliability in seconds and complete, transparency of the data. for a bunch of those components then, again, because we have the digital library of components, we didn't even draw them. We sent the files straight to a robot that made them. So again, speed, predictability, technology. The thing that robot makes is exactly what was in the drawing. Like, these are literally kind of, sub-millimeter accurate. So suddenly all the normal things in construction around people interpreting drawings, did they measure it right? Did they have the right skills to make the thing? Did they have all the thing? Just disappears. You go straight from a model that took you seconds to a robot that will make hundreds of these things overnight. So speed, predictability, technology, and yes, suddenly all the problems you get on site around tolerances, does it fit, all the problem solving you have to do, again, evaporates because it will fit, because a robot made it and it's super accurate. We then, the next video is a prototype that we built. We actually did this for real. The site actually looked like this, but it's easy to show on the prototype. So we wanted to test whether you could build an office superstructure, 9 meter by 9 meter grid, so it's reasonably sort of big grids, using a tiny handful of people, a tiny handful of processes, and a little bit of automation. So this was our prototyping. The test here was, could you build the entire superstructure without ever standing on the superstructure? So you build the entire thing from below. So what you can see here is color-coded, laser-cut components, tiny number of operatives, tiny number of activities. We're measuring things in minutes. Little bit of automation. We use a thing called reach stackers they use in distribution sheds all over the country. And the idea was you lift up the beams, you lift up the shuttering, you pump the concrete from below. It's low carbon concrete, self-leveling, little robot levels it. And no one ever had to work at height on this project. All the MEP fixings were already cast into the slab, so there was no drilling on site. And we've had University of Cambridge crawling all over this project. But it shows you can build a superstructure about twice as quickly with about half the number of people. So that's a kind of fourfold increase in productivity. And by the way, these aren't steel fixers or construction people. These are people at the prototyping centre who we taught how to put the bits together. So we're now building a superstructure that's much more accurate, way quicker, with a handful of people who've never built anything. And you go, right, that's getting quite interesting now. What it did was, because of the fact we'd sort of super optimized it, we'd reduced the number of parts, we'd controlled all the logistics. It's actually the UK's first net zero commercial development in operation and embodied carbon. So the UK Green Business Council's got quite a stringent definition, so meeting that is not easy, but it's the first time anyone's done it because of the fact that we did all these things to drive out embodied carbon, sort out logistics, sort out the people on site, et cetera, et cetera. And we took about 30% of embodied carbon out of this building through that. Facade, there was then also a kit of parts. I can't talk about all these in detail, but I'll talk at the breakout later. Fun fact on these, the facade wasn't weird. We didn't specially design the facade, but we designed the superstructure as a carrier frame ready to receive the facade. The install crew had planned 7 panels in a day. So it'll be about an hour a panel with lunch. Just before Christmas, they did 19 in an hour and a half. So it went from an hour activity to 7 minutes a panel because we'd designed in all their processes, we'd designed how to work it, and then they had to stop because they ran out of panels. So all the data we've gathered in this project shows these incredible bursts of productivity, but they were never sustained because the logistics wasn't there to keep up with it. It's really interesting. But it is, I mentioned to someone, they were saying, it's like the mindset of 30 years ago, you couldn't change a tyre in less than half an hour. And now Formula One's like, that's 4 seconds. It's that sort of magnitude that suddenly you get into going, if I'd said at the start of the project, that'd be 7.5 minutes. I mean, they literally said, you'll never get it down less than an hour. 7.5 minutes later, they're going, all right, that was quite impressive. And then the last thing, the MEP is also a super optimized kit of parts. Again, design a digital library. The client can choose what MEP system they want quite late in the day, which in normal construction would be a nightmare, but actually we can just sort of swap the bits in and out. But you can see because of the way the superstructure is set up, we have a single frame that fits in every structural bay. The MEP manufacturers have literally benches set up. They just drop the stuff on, wheel it off onto a stillage, wheel that onto a truck, wheel that onto the floor plate, and then lift the whole thing up with a special forklift. Bang, stick it in the slab. It's like stapling. They just blast that into slab. Next one, blast into slab. Bottom left, you can see the install times once they got the hang of it. So on the left-hand side, the higher numbers, that's using Genie lifts, so that's current best practice, best in class, with a really slick team doing the best they can. Once we taught them how to use the special equipment, install times collapsed. And again, the data shows you could have built this building literally twice as quick with half as many people, because every trade was just bursting through it. We didn't, because no one believed that, and so they didn't make the bits quick enough. But, and it looks amazing. Looks like a machine. It's fantastic inside it. So I'll stop there, but yeah, you can see there's a load of things that we did. Some of the design phase, some of the manufacture, the assembly, the procurement, logistics, all these things came together, but it's all the things that Jeff talked about in terms of speed, predictability, technology, capacity, safety. They're all like really, really doable. They are being done now. And the reason I want to show you that project is not because it's a massive project, but if you imagine those sorts of benefits multiplied by the scale of the UK public sector pipeline, multiplied by 9.2 trillion pounds, suddenly you can see how we could really, really plausibly shift the needle on this if everyone starts to pick up this stuff. So on the one hand, it's incredibly daunting that this stuff is coming up towards us, but hopefully it's also encouraging that, you know, a lot of the solutions actually exist now. It's just a question of picking them up, scaling them up, and making them widely available. So I'll stop there because I'm slightly overrun. Apologies for that. But yeah, hopefully that was interesting, and hopefully some of you will come to the breakout session later. Thank you a lot. Sorry about that.
I think that was, I don't know what you guys think, but that was fascinating. So we're going to have a few minutes now Q&A. So I'm pretty sure you've got some questions for these two guys. I think I have. Then we'll have a break, and then at about in about 10, 15 minutes we'll break for half an hour. Okay? So over to you. Questions, please.
So that's a commercial office.
Commercial office.
That's an office building. Some of the most exciting things we're doing at the moment are data centers, but we're not allowed to show you for, you can probably imagine why. So yeah, we've done loads. We've done, you know, pharmaceutical, airports, data centers, healthcare facilities. I'm currently working on the new hospitals program, which is the big rollout of healthcare across the UK. So yeah, we haven't encountered a sector where these things, this actually grew out of us having done loads of process and industrial facilities around the world, and it's sort of converging some of that learning. So yeah, no, it definitely works for heavy loads. Yeah, there's nothing in that. Again, you just tune the components to make them and the slabs and things, but yeah, there's nothing in it that's...
You had to pick the productivity improvement percentage when you started.
Barring understand that you had constraints and logistics after you got better and better, but what kind of productivity could you expect, improvement?
There were peaks where they got 400% increase.
Did you hear that?
So the McKinsey, I'm sure you've all saw the McKinsey productivity imperative thing that said if you increase productivity by like 20%, that's worth trillions. We're going, yeah, no, we're smashing that. Again, it's the kind of Formula One changing a tyre versus you with the jack doing it. So again, it wasn't sustained and needs work, but it definitely shows that it's not a 5, 10, 15% increase. This is dramatic if it's done right.
I think it's worth saying that you know, when we talk about what can we achieve with AWP, we kind of benchmark against what we've been able to achieve in the past, based with the technology and the approaches we've used. That doesn't mean to say we can't use new technologies, new ways of working, as Jamie's saying here, and smash those things. So you need to be realistic if you're not doing anything different, but if you're adopting new ways of working, you've got to start to push the boundary.
We've got some other questions here. How does AWP concept apply in the system?
So it's interesting. So I'm not an AWP practitioner, but Lloyd keeps inviting me back because we don't use the terminology of AWP, but we definitely use the methodology, I would say. Same with lean. We don't use lean terminology, but everything we do, the lean community will also go, yeah, I completely recognize what you're doing. So we haven't applied it to this. I think that would be, a next step, but hopefully you can see there's massive overlaps between AWP methodology. If you applied it to the kit of parts, then that's the next evolution, I suspect.
And I think that takes us to the next question, which is amazing speed, structural builds. Do you have examples of unit processes or process units done this way? Or has it just been in buildings so far?
Just been buildings.
Just been buildings. But there's no reason why you couldn't apply it to process units in the same methodologies.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, pharmaceuticals, we've done loads of pharmaceuticals and data centers and things like this. And again,
that's not a million light years away, is it?
Well, again, it's that if you looked for the commonality, I bet you'd find fundamentally there's a lot of commonality between a data center and a process building. I suspect it's cables rather than pipes, but
I think you can start in the process industry. You start looking at what parts of your project lend itself to this. Yeah. We all build buildings, we build warehouses, we do all sorts of structural stuff. Yeah. It's immediately translatable. It gets a bit tricky when we start talking about valves and reactors and those kind of things, but that shouldn't stop you eating this from the outside in, which was the approach we talked about in Shell.
We're doing this in the nuclear sector at the moment, actually, and I didn't think we knew anything about nuclear. But actually, the nuclear community said, there's the hot bit, there's the kettle, and for sure that's quite a specialist, but there's also a load of other stuff, balance of plant, which is not really nuclear, it's just MEP effectively. So once you start looking for the common bits, there's tons to go at.
Yeah. Slightly different question. How do you cope with local regulations and deal with those processes?
We tend to have adaptations to kit apart, so we'll have, within the library of components, there'll be a sort of seismic thing and a non-seismic thing, for instance. So, but actually, again, what we found is fundamentally the regs they're trying to resist gravity, which is the same wind and things. So actually, again, there's not huge variance. Some of our clients have said, if you designed me the kit of parts which copes with a worse condition, I would just use that everywhere, and for sure it'll be over-designed in some places, but it's not worth the effort of trying to make it a bit leaner for a specific instance. So.
I just saw a question that was to Shell, but I've lost it now. But anyway, can you combine the platform practice with modularization in oil and gas construction? I think we've sort of touched on that already. Yeah. And anything further to add on that in that sort of whole modularization process?
So on that building, actually, we had things like the package plant, the core, the lifts, the vertical circulation was modular, and then we had the kind of platform bits that we did, and there were some traditional things in the basement. So again, it's not a kind of either or. You use it where it's appropriate, and you draw on other forms of industrialized construction where it's appropriate, and traditional where it's also appropriate. It's not a kind of big bang one or the other, it's you use the right sort of blend of these things.
Yeah, I think that sometimes there's a bit of an all or nothing thing with modularization. And I know Jamie used to make a tremendous allusion to this, talking about IKEA, saying, when you go down to your IKEA warehouse, do you take the flat pack out, build it into a cupboard, strap it to the top of your car and drive it home? Well, no, you'd be stupid to do that, so you take it and do it. So it's not just about large-scale modularization, it's about that ease of assembly and a reliable kit of parts. So there'll be horses for courses in all of this.
Bit of a different question, and I think, Jay, I don't know whether you want to deal with this, but clients, to what extent is CO2 footprint of an EPC project an aspect of bid comparison today and in the future?
Yeah, no, I got a mic on. Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I think what I would say is that if we look at things like AWP, for instance, we're just now contractually getting to the point where we are going to say, what is the maturity of the contractors bidding the work? And based on that maturity, we can assign how much of an advantage or disadvantage the application of AWP can be. And then we will adjust those proposals to accommodate that. So we're just now getting there in that space. But I could see very easily in this space, with the speed of the issue that we have, that this becomes a thing where our contract and procurement group would require companies to have that kind of expertise and just to be able to bid. I don't know what it might look like with respect to one against another, but yeah, I'm sure someday we'll be there. I think it'll be a bit away, but we will be there.
It's interesting, in the BIM space, BIM went from a sort of time to shine question and differentiate yourself from your competitors to a pass-fail thing really quickly.
Yep.
So in the early days, it was like, can you do BIM now? It's like, if you're not doing BIM to this level, I'm not even looking at the rest of it. The same thing's happening with DFMA, and I suspect carbon will be the next one. It'll go from a time to shine to it's just a pass-fail.
Yep. Probably.
So we've got one more. How was testing and commissioning carried out with all the component MEP parts?
So we did loads of pre-commissioning in the factory. So everything was sort of pre-tested, and then we designed the building in a particular way that you could lock off entire floors or lock off bits of the buildings, commission those independently, and then sort of connect it. Also, again, it was designed to facilitate that commissioning bit. We do more of that in certainly healthcare. It's a huge thing. Data centers, it's a huge thing. But yeah, part of the designing of the components and the kit of parts and the assembly process is also the commissioning and handover process also gets sort of designed into it. So.
Okay.
John, don't run us off yet, John. I got one question I got to ask before we leave, okay? And I'm sure you'll cover it in the breakout, but did you all use, some of the analytics and photogrammetry and things as this thing was built in order to capture these improvements and continue? And how did that? I'm sure you can explain it in the breakout, but the answer is yes, right?
It was really interesting, actually. The contractors were keen, let's say, to find problems with the system. Because we turned up and said, you build it like this and you do this, and here's a video that we've made earlier, and you can see them going, I think, oh, yeah, we'll find all the problems with that. And every time they found a problem, actually, it was generally to do with their inability to, it was the tolerance gaps, for instance, between their traditionally built bit and our system. They're going, well, I think your system's a bit crap, and you're going, well, we'll point cloud survey it and we'll test, shall we? Whether it's the sub-millimeter accurate bits that were made by a robot or the bits your blokes made with, like, knocking stuff about. So every time there was an issue, we were constantly point cloud scanning. We were comparing the as-built and as-designed. And eventually they stopped trying to find problems because they're going, they'll just catch us out. As soon as we go, that doesn't fit, we go, well, because you installed that wrong. And they go,
Great.
So yeah, we have a massive sort of data set to capture all the stuff we did.
Right, some great questions there. If you've any more, we're going to have a break now, so these two guys are going to be available, I'm pretty sure. And it gives you an opportunity now to really reflect on this presentation, this discussion, which I think has been absolutely mind-blowing, really. So we'll break for half an hour. And back here at 10 past. You will be back here.
They'll go to the breakouts, 11:15.
Yeah. And we're coming back to the breakouts. But I think we'll break now and then we'll organise that. So I think we ought to show appreciation to Jeff and Jamie. Excellent.
Okay, we off?